Pacify, Part 1. Chapter 2. The Only One. After almost hitting the boy, and then ending up hurting him anyway, Severus resolved to keep his temper in check, no matter what Potter said or did. He was a grown wizard, after all. It was his responsibility to keep his good sense, no matter how much he was provoked. He was the master of his emotions. He toyed with the idea of going to Dumbledore, of telling the headmaster about Potter's behaviour and about their altercation. But in the end, he decided against it. He could handle this. Potter was only a student, after all. That he was the chosen one, and a second-generation arrogant fool, made no difference. And, as it turned out, it was all well and good that Severus didn't set up a meeting with the headmaster, as he was called the next night. The Dark Lord wanted to inquire after Potter's condition. Severus wasn't the secret keeper for the Order, and as such couldn't give away Potter's location, but Voldemort knew that full well, and he wasn't expecting that sort of information. As it turned out, he simply wanted to know how Potter was getting along, how he was handling the war and his losses, if the pressure was getting to him, if he was functioning. Severus told him the truth. Potter was doing very poorly. He was isolating himself. He was lashing out. He wasn't sleeping. His personality had changed. The Dark Lord was satisfied, even pleased by that answer, as Severus knew he would be.
"Perhaps you might help the boy along, Severus," Voldemort had practically purred at him. "The weaker he is, the better."
"Yes, my lord. As you wish." He felt sick saying it. He wasn't supposed to have so much access, let alone in the middle of the night. But Potter had thrown himself into Severus's lap. He was dismissed a short while later, and apparated back to the stoop of number 12 long past midnight. Upon entering the headquarters, Severus was appalled to almost immediately run into Potter, who was sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood. He looked up as he heard Severus's footsteps. "Potter," Severus said, drawing his cloak around himself. "It's 2 a.m. "You weren't in the basement," Harry said by way of a reply. "Or anywhere else." "Do forgive me for not alerting you to my absence, your majesty," Severus sneered. "Go back to bed." Harry made no move to leave. "Were you with Voldemort?" "That is none of your concern." "I beg to differ." Severus sighed, crossed to the cabinet, and took down a glass. "Aguamenti," he said, and set the full cup in front of the boy. "Drink some water, Potter. You look terrible." He did look terrible. His face was pale, with dark shadows under his eyes, and the bruise on his cheekbone had faded to a greenish-yellow smudge the size of a knot. "I'm not thirsty," Harry said. "Do as you're told." Harry looked up at him, and Severus realized that he'd used a harder tone than was perhaps necessary. But Harry did take up the cup, and he did drink. Severus looked away as he swallowed the water, waiting until he heard the glass clink back onto the table to look back up, just in time to see Potter's tongue flick out over his bottom lip. "Now, Potter, go back upstairs," he said, focusing on the spot between the boy's eyebrows so as not to make eye contact. "You need to sleep." "I can't sleep." The corner of the boy's mouth quirked up as he said this, but his eyebrows drew down in the centre, crinkling the skin there. "I haven't slept in weeks. Not since—" He trailed off and tilted the empty glass, balancing it on the edge of its base. "Why did Voldemort call you?" "As I said, Potter, that is none of your concern." At his words, Harry leapt to his feet and hurled the empty glass to the floor. It shattered, spraying Severus's boots with shards of crystal. "Not my concern!" he shouted. "Potter, calm yourself." "I will not!" "You'll raise the whole house," Severus hissed, pointing his wand at the door and warding it with a silencing charm. Remus was upstairs, he was sure. And the brats. "I don't care! I deserve to know what you've been telling him about me!" He seemed about to have a fit. Severus seized his shoulders. "Potter, please," he said. "Calm—" "No! Don't touch me, you filthy death—" "Potter!" Severus shook the boy once, very hard. "Breathe!" "No, you can't tell me what to do! You don't get to decide! You let go of me!" He started to struggle violently against Severus's grip on his shoulders, and Severus, afraid he might hurt himself, pulled him in closer, enfolding him tight against his chest with both arms like a straitjacket. Harry continued to thrash, his hysterical babbling muffled into incoherence against Severus's robes, but Severus just held him tighter, squeezing him, crushing him, willing him to stop struggling. He could tell when Potter realized he couldn't escape, as he went suddenly limp, and Severus had to take some of his weight to keep him from crumpling to the floor. His shoulders and back began to shake. He started to weep. "I'll have to clean my robes," Severus thought, as he continued to hold the boy tightly through his tears. Blast him. After a few long moments, Harry's sobbing began to weaken, and his arms came up to clutch at Severus's back, and Severus was beginning to regret his silencing charm. He was not equipped to handle this. He needed reinforcements. And what was he supposed to say? Potter was right. Nothing about this was fair, and there was no reason to expect him to be calm for even a single moment. Cautiously, Severus touched the back of Harry's head, and when that contact was not rejected, stroked his fingertips into his hair and against his scalp. How could anyone expect more of him, really? How could anyone expect him to be functioning at all, after all he'd been through? he was only a boy. As Harry's weeping slowly subsided to harsh breaths, his back finally began to relax beneath Severus's hand. Severus's chin was just touching the top of Potter's head, and he could smell his shampoo. "Potter," he began. But then, in the quiet of his hesitation, he heard the creak of the landing above. Lupin, thank Merlin, coming to save him. Harry heard it too, and he lifted his head from Severus's chest, pulling part way away. They made eye contact for a single moment before Severus released him and stepped back. And Harry, his breath still ragged, turned away from him and started wiping his face furiously with the hem of his shirt. Severus pointed his wand at the shards of broken crystal. "Reparo." The glass flew to his hand, whole again. The door to the kitchen creaked. "Harry?" It was indeed Lupin. "Are you all right? I heard—" He broke off as he saw Snape standing there, awkwardly holding the cup. "Severus, did something happen?" "Potter had a nightmare," Severus answered. "I was just getting him a glass of water." Were his robes visibly wet? "Oh, Harry," Lupin continued, seeming to notice the boy's bloodshot eyes and flushed face for the first time, and strode over to enfold him in an embrace. Harry looked quite stiff and uncomfortable in his arms, though he didn't move away. "Are you all right?" "Oh, yes," Severus thought. "Baby him. Excellent. Pat, pat, Potter. There, there. Little madman is going to get me killed." "Yeah, I just had a dream," Harry answered. His eyes, red and puffy, met Severus's over Lupin's shoulder. "About Sirius." "I'm so sorry, Harry," Lupin said. "I dream about him too, sometimes." "Yeah." Severus tore his gaze away with no small effort. "I'll be going then," he said. "I've a report to make." Lupin looked over at him. "Wait a moment, will you?" he asked, finally releasing Harry from his embrace. He reached for the glass in Severus's hand and filled it. "Here, Harry. Try to sleep a bit, okay?" Harry took the water and sipped at it half-heartedly. "Thanks, Professor Lupin," he said. I'll go back to bed." "Thanks." He looked at Severus. Severus could see it out of the corner of his eye as he stared fixedly at the floor. "Good night." Remus ruffled his hair affectionately. "A few hours at least." "Yeah," he smiled weakly. "I'll try." The creak of the stairs as Harry ascended was clearer when Severus was listening for it, and he could tell when the boy reached the first landing. The second. "You shouldn't, Severus." Severus's eyes snapped over to Lupin at the words with a jolt of fear. What could the werewolf possibly mean by that? He curled his lip just a little and asked, "Shouldn't what?" He crossed his arms. Lupin just sighed and leaned against the counter. "Needle him," he answered. He's not the same boy he was before, you know. He can't take as much from you. As if Severus had done anything more than get the boy a drink of water and be assaulted. "Oh, yes, fragile Potter," he sneered. "Pity to think that no one will treat him gently when it counts. You know what I mean. He needs a safe place, just like anyone else. Don't take it away from him for nothing." Severus replied. "He doesn't need coddling. He needs training. And possibly medical intervention," he thought. "I'm not asking you to coddle him." Lupin sounded exasperated. "I'm asking you to treat him neutrally. Surely that's not too much to ask." If only he would let me, he thought. "Yes, of course," Severus said. "But make sure to give him the same lecture. He brings it upon himself." That was as close to a disclosure as he was going to give, and he turned at once and strode from the kitchen and through the parlour, only to hesitate at the foot of the stairs. God forbid Potter was lurking somewhere up there. Lupin only stayed at number 12 for a few days more after that, and soon departed with the remaining members of the order. It was nearly midnight that time, and Severus had sequestered himself away in an isolated anteroom for the night, high above his usual haunt in the basement. "Pity they keep leaving us alone, eh, Snape?" The hairs on the back of Severus's neck stood up, but he refused to turn around. "Go away, Potter," he said, careful not to raise his voice. "I'm not in the mood to play." He could hear Potter's footsteps, quiet and shoeless though they were, but, to his dismay, they were not the footsteps of withdrawal, and almost at once he could feel Potter's presence at his elbow. "What are you working on?" He could see the shock of unruly hair and the glint of candlelight off of eyeglasses out of the corner of his eye, too. "Deaf, Potter. I said go away." There was a pause, and then, quietly, "You know I won't." Severus did know it. "What are you working on?" Severus refused to acknowledge that his heart was beating faster than usual, refused to admit that he was afraid of what Potter had thought up to torment him. "Something eventually to be used to prolong your infuriating life, no doubt," he muttered. "What was that?" Potter asked, pretending not to have heard. "Go ask Albus. I'm sure he'd be willing to indulge your incessant nattering. I, however, am not." He pushed a stray hair out of his eyes, and saw in his peripheral vision how Potter's eyes flicked towards the movement. Not afraid. Enjoying his discomfort. Severus shook himself inwardly. That was not helping. There was a silence then, only punctuated by Severus's measured breaths, before Potter spoke again. "Severus Snape," he began slowly, as if considering the name. "Has anyone ever told you that you sound like a bastard?" Severus smacked his stirring rod down onto the table. "What, Potter?" he hissed through teeth he hadn't even realized he'd clenched. "What did you want?" What was happening to the little brat, he thought? Was he suicidal? "Why won't you look at me?" The question caught Severus off guard, as he realized that he was still staring into the cauldron before him, though he no longer saw the potion inside. "Because I feel that to acknowledge your insane behavior would be to encourage it," he said. "You're already acknowledging it." Well, he supposed that was true. So he looked over to Potter, where he was hovering next to him, and asked again, "What do you want from me?" Potter, for a moment, seemed not to know. But then, in a whisper that spoke more of pain than shouting ever could, had an answer after all. "Make me forget." The words fell like a pebble into still water, leaving ripples that suddenly changed how everything looked. And Severus painfully recalled the way Potter had broken open while held tight against him, held fast, unable to flee. How his misery had come flooding out. "You're talking nonsense, Potter." The boy didn't respond, just stood there watching him for a few moments longer, and then left. Perhaps wondering what he'd said, what it meant, just as Severus was wondering what any of it meant, or indeed, if there was any meaning to be found. Later, when Severus tried simply staying in his quarters, which were high above the rest of the bedrooms, almost in the attic, it backfired rather soundly. He'd locked the door, he knew he had, but apparently it's of little use to lock doors against the owner of the doors themselves. He was just about ready to turn in fact, when he heard the soft, telltale snick of the bolt releasing. But he didn't turn to see who it was. He didn't need to. "Hiding, Snape?" Harry asked from the doorway. Severus heard his socked feet move into the room. "Yes," he replied frankly, still not turning. "How characteristic." He was expecting it, yet still Severus felt his nostrils flare, and for a moment he wished with all his heart that he could just take points for insolence and be done with it. But he wasn't at Hogwarts. He was trapped in Potter's house. Oh, yes. He could tell that Potter was well into the room now. "I am, as you say, a coward." He would not rise to the provocation. Not again. He had to try something new, something to make Potter give up this sick fixation once and for all. "Yes, well, why else would you be stuck here with me, in this house?" Maybe he could scare it out of him, shock him so badly he never tries again, make him realize this isn't what he wants. "This may be Black's house," Severus began, and finally turned to face the boy. He was dressed in his pyjamas, tousle-headed, as if he'd lain in bed for a while, trying to sleep, before giving up and coming for him. Severus approached him with measured, slow strides. "But, Potter..." He was looking down at him now, looming. "You're in my bedroom." Potter's eyes flickered uncertainly, away and then back to his face, and he made a small, quiet sound in the back of his throat. An incongruous, half-formed noise that Severus found echoing in his head even as he refused to acknowledge it. You're doing it again, Potter breathed, and Severus sensed him shifting his weight, as if unsure whether to move forward or back. Doing what? Looking at me like you want to. He hesitated, floundering for the right words, and trailed off as Severus put a hand against his collarbone just at the base of his throat and started pushing him backwards. And Harry didn't resist, didn't try to dislodge him or stand against him, even as he landed Potter's back up against the door he deigned enter through. Like I want to hurt you. Severus's thumb was resting against the artery in Potter's throat, and he could feel the heartbeat in it. Changed your mind, He pressed a little against the pulse, feeling it beat a nervous staccato through Potter's flesh. Potter swallowed and moistened his lips with a flick of his tongue. I haven't, he said. Then why, boy? Severus stroked the speeding heartbeat. Are you so afraid? I'm not afraid of you. It was a defiant reply, but the voice behind it was soft and sounded almost breathless. There should have been bravado and insolence there, anger and hatred in those eyes, as there had been every time before. But either Potter had tried to summon them and failed, or else he hadn't tried at all. Severus furrowed his brow. You should be. You should know what I am capable of doing to you. He shifted his hand, finding no more resistance now than before, and squeezed just a little, just enough to emphasize how easily, effortlessly even, he could cut off Potter's breath, right there, against the door, just like that. You keep provoking me, he continued, easing the pressure and curling his fingers into the shirt the Gryffindor wore. It was flimsy and worn, hardly a barrier at all to the chill of number 12, which surely explained the goosebumps Severus could see prickling the hairs on Potter's arms. You keep pushing me. Potter's breath was shallow. Surely you can't think there will be no consequences. Potter seemed to press back into the wall, turning his head to snatch a breath that sounded like a gasp, as if he couldn't use the air between them. Severus shook him for emphasis, jerking his head back from where it was turned away. Surely you can't think I will allow this insanity to continue. There was a flush in his cheeks now, and Severus thought for a moment that he was getting through. But then Harry lifted his chin in defiance. Then make me stop. Severus blinked, growled in frustration, and released his hold on Potter's collar to slap his hand against the wood. How? He barked, meaning it rhetorically, an expression of frustration. But Potter answered him anyway, pushing off from the wall just enough to kiss him. And for a moment, Severus didn't think, couldn't think. as every fibre in his mind focused to the mouth pressing desperately against his. And, God help him, but he kissed back. More than that, his hand went reflexively to the back of Harry's head, into his hair, and Potter arched up against him with another one of those tiny sounds. But now Severus could recognize it for what it was. A whimper, and Severus's attention tunneled to the sound. Potter's hands were on his chest, but not pushing him away. Oh no, clutching him closer, pulling on him like he wanted to crawl inside. And it was there that the moment broke, that the mouth and body became Harry Potter, and the heady rush of arousal became a spike of panic like a lightning bolt into his mind. "Potter, stop!" Severus gasped, using his hold on Potter's hair to pull free. To look down, shocked, at Harry's closed eyes, his lips and his throat, bared and arched back by Severus's grip. Harry gasped in pain at the fist in his hair, and Severus saw him bite his lower lip, scraping his teeth over it, as if trying to taste him. "What in Merlin's name, Potter?" he demanded, though his voice surely fell short of authoritative in that moment, with Potter's hands still clutching his robes and holding him too close. "Please." It was more a moan than a word. "Please." And Severus felt his hold on reality tilt crazily, felt that he would never be able to clean this moment from his mind. Not ever. Not when Potter was begging him. "Mother of God!" he gasped, wrenching free of Harry's fingers and stumbling back a few steps before catching himself as Harry sagged against the door. Severus couldn't decide whether to shout or curse or run, so he simply stood there, hand shaking as it clutched his wand, as Potter righted himself against the door, a strange expression passing briefly across his eyes. He slid 2 fingertips into his mouth, and even Severus could see that they came away red. Harry looked down at them. "Professor," he said, "you made me bleed." Severus choked, took an involuntary step forward, and pressed the back of his hand to his mouth against a spike of arousal so strong, so violent, that it felt like a dagger in his belly. "Get out of here right now, or I swear I will obliviate you." He'd almost whispered it, but Harry heard, and showed he'd heard with a brief half-smile that was gone before ever reaching his eyes. "But not yourself," he replied, and Severus didn't like the knowing tone to his voice, didn't like the fact that it was true. He wouldn't have obliviated himself, wouldn't have given up the memory of what had just happened, no matter how wrong or depraved or disturbing it was. No matter how Harry's voice cracked as he pleaded. Severus shook his head violently against the thought. "Then obliviate me," Harry continued. "Just make sure to get everything. Put me in St. Mungo's in a padded room." "Everything," Severus repeated numbly, and for an instant he could see himself doing it, taking all the burdens from Potter's shoulder with one sweep of his wand, erasing everything that had ever happened to take a perfectly normal child and turn him into this. Give him this life. And he knew, with the abruptness of epiphany, what Potter was trying to get from him. rest, oblivion. Any way he could get it. The boy was suffering, indeed. Potter. He didn't have the slightest idea what to say. Potter, What, Professor? Harry ran his tongue over the split in his lip, and Severus couldn't quite tell whether it was an absent gesture or a calculated one. It didn't really matter, though, because either way he was still doing it. I can't, he finished lamely, and belatedly realized that his knuckles were still clutched white around his wand, which was still pointed at Potter's breast. Can't. The Gryffindor didn't seem to care about the wand, however, and simply pushed it aside with one hand as he followed Severus to where he'd stumbled. And now Severus could see the tiny smudge of blood on his bottom lip, the way it was beginning to swell so subtly. You're guilty of worse things. Potter was breathing his air, and Severus found himself shamefully, inexplicably paralyzed by it. You've lied, tortured, murdered. The tips of Potter's toes touched the tips of his boots, and Severus couldn't back up any further without climbing over furniture. It would be easier to obliviate him, medicate him. It would be better. Haven't you? He touched Severus's forearm, and Severus knew it was the mark that caused his hand to linger there before clutching at him. Haven't you? Why me, Potter? He asked, as Harry's other hand joined the first, tangling into his robes. Why choose me for this? The look in his eyes answered when his voice did not. It was a look that begged for understanding where it couldn't be given. A look that begged for the simple efficiency of legitimacy. Severus had been inside Potter's mind many times, of course, during their disastrous occlumency lessons. But this was different. He hesitated. Potter blinked at him once, and then closed his eyes, giving his permission. Legilimens, Severus murmured. You're the only one who knows what I am. The thought came at once, as if waiting for an audience, and such a torrent of self-loathing followed that Severus pulled back in shock. And what do you think you are? He wanted to ask. Potter, you need help, he said instead, closing his fingers around Harry's wrists to dislodge them from his clothes. And not from me. Who then? Not me. Potter let his hands relax as if to emphasize Severus's grip, and looked up at him, that spot of blood still on his lip, staining it red. He raised his chin, tilted it to the side, and Severus didn't need any magical help to get the message loud and clear. Kiss me. Severus forced himself to take a slow, measured breath. It was the masochist in him that wanted Harry to win this. It was madness, weakness. It was foolish beyond reason to touch a student that way. And it was madness, too, for Potter's mouth to have yielded to him so easily. for Potter's body to fit so perfectly against him. "You think this will ease your suffering," Severus said, squeezing Harry's wrists still clasped in his hands. "But it won't. It will destroy you." "I will destroy you," he didn't say. "I want you to," Harry murmured, and Severus's resistance wasn't enough to keep him from being pulled closer, Potter's breath feathering across his lips. And, in some ways, the fact that his eyes were closed made it worse, made the words whispered against his mouth all the more obscene. "I want you to tear me apart." "Merlin Potter," Severus breathed, turning his face away at the last moment so that Harry's lips slid against his jaw. He seized Harry's shoulders and pushed him to arm's length. "This isn't what you need." "What then?" Harry burst out. "Nothing else helps. No one else makes me feel normal." He broke off, 2 red spots appearing on his cheeks. He was getting angry again. That was good. Severus felt as though he could breathe a little easier, now that he couldn't feel Potter's body heat radiating through his clothes. "This makes you feel normal?" he asked. "It..." Harry licked his lips, looking at the floor. "It makes me feel like I'm not in charge. Like it's not my responsibility." "You aren't in charge," Severus replied, dropping his hands from Harry's shoulders and turning away from him. "There are dozens of people more in charge than you." Harry exhaled sharply, raking his hand through his hair, standing it up at even wilder angles than usual. "Doesn't feel like it," he said. "That's because you are an entitled, self-important twit," Severus said. He didn't turn to see the anger flash across Harry's face. "Now please, leave me in peace." He moved a book from one side of his bureau to the other, doing his best to look supremely uninterested in Potter and his turmoil. As far as that was possible, after his show of concern. "You can't get rid of me that easily," Harry said, taking a few steps towards Severus, where he'd retreated. Severus sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose. "I know that, Potter. Just go now. For tonight. Please," he thought. "Want me to stew in my own juices for a while, is that it?" Potter asked snidely, suddenly at Severus's elbow. "Fine, just..." He ran his fingers through his hair again. "Give me something." Severus looked down at him with one eyebrow raised. He could think of a number of things Potter might want from him just then. A whole new category of possible requests. "I think I've given you quite enough," he said. The corner of Potter's mouth twitched. "To sleep, I mean," he clarified. And Severus closed his eyes for a moment before summoning a bottle from his bedside table. He held it out. "To sleep," he said, and Harry took it from his hand. "Thanks." He turned towards the door, but paused as Severus called after him. "Oh, and Potter," he said, his back still turned. "I would appreciate your discretion, if you understand me." "Yes, sir." When the door latched closed, Severus was humiliated to find that he felt suddenly exhausted, as if all his will had been wrung out of him. He sat heavily on the bed and put his head in his hands, refusing to acknowledge that he had been so easily and so totally provoked, refusing to acknowledge that he was painfully, undeniably hard. And it was Potter that had made him that way.